All right, hey y'all, thanks for stopping by. Be sure to subscribe, give me a thumbs up. But we're going to talk about taxes today, federal taxes, income taxes. And have you ever wondered, gee, my taxes are so high, but what is it historically? And what's fair? And more importantly, what does the Constitution say? See, as I like to say, when it comes down to a question, I like to look back at the Constitution and what the Founding Fathers actually said about an issue. And when I started thinking about taxes, income taxes from that perspective, it led to a pretty surprising revelation. Stay tuned. All right, so the first thing to know is this is going to be a pretty big video and probably the most important one I ever do. It's going to be broken down into three subparts. The first one is what is the federal budget? How big is it? What are the incomes? What are the outgoes? I've got a little tweak in there, but that's going to be pretty short, but I think it's important to understand the absolute magnitude of what we're talking about. Number two, I want to look at the history of the income tax. It's very, very interesting. And what was the first income tax? How much was it? And then finally, number three is what I kind of consider the bombshell, the aha moment I had of what should the federal government budget be if it was based purely on the Constitution and on the Founding Fathers. And I think you're going to find that interesting. All right, so I've got a little cheat sheet here in front of me, and we're going to talk about the federal budget. So the first thing is the federal budget. This is based on the 2019-2020 projections. The federal budget is for expenditures of 4.746 trillion with a T, and incomes of 3.645 trillion. So that leaves a deficit every single year of $1.1 trillion. Now we all know that our politicians, our representatives up there, just lying to us and spending money every year. I think the debt is up to 22 trillion now. It's actually bigger than the GDP of the entire country. But that's horrific. But I don't want to use those numbers. And it doesn't matter. You'll see at the very end, it doesn't matter. I want to subtract out Social Security. Okay? The reason is this: Social Security is a discrete tax that employers and employees actually pay. It equals out to be, what, 12.4%, I believe. And it's set aside. And right now, it actually is still got more money coming in than is going out. Unlike Medicaid and Medicare, which are insufficiently taxed for the benefits they provide, and so it's drawing on the income tax revenue that's being brought in. So we can remove Social Security, not to mention, the libertarian side of me is like, really, that's just socialism, but people love it, and the fact of the matter is we can remove it and it doesn't really change the whole perspective. So, the incomes for Social Security are 997 billion, the outgoes are 952. So basically we're subtracting about $1 trillion from the two numbers before. So the next piece is what's the history of taxation? What does the Constitution actually say about taxation? Well, to find that, you actually look at three different areas, but you have to look at Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. That did not mean income tax. So there was talk about income tax back during 1812, and it never went anywhere. With the War of Southern Secession, the Union had to impose an income tax to fund the war effort, but that was repealed, or it ran out. And then they tried to institute another income tax, and it was shot down. It was ruled unconstitutional, and that leads us to the 16th Amendment in 1913. So once the 16th Amendment came around, it was lights out. So the first income tax in the United States was 1913. It was 1%. 1%, and there was a 6% surcharge on top of that. And of course, once the flood of money started into the government, it went crazy. They jumped it up for World War I, dropped it back down, and then jumped it up again for World War II. And we've been at historic highs ever since. And you can see this in this graph I'm going to put up right here. The United States survived from our founding to 1913, essentially, without an income tax, and then it was 1%. So I want you as the viewer to just think for a moment. If you kept 99% of every dollar you made, you don't have to earn that $400 and only receive $300 back. I mean, if you really got to keep almost every penny, how much would your life change? You know, Democrats, you want to reduce poverty in America, let people keep more of their money. So that's kind of the history of it and how we got to it. But once the government got their hands in your pocket, they just kept jacking it up. And what I've gotten tired of is the Democrats saying, well, we have this new program we want to institute, and we're just going to jack up your taxes just a little bit. While the Republicans are like, well, look, we just lowered your tax rate from 23 to 22%. How great are we? And I'm over here being like, hey, you thieves, it should be 0. So the last thing I'm going to throw out there is, we've talked about the income taxes, and personally I think that 1, maybe 5% might be okay. I actually think it should be 0, but they did pass an amendment. That means it is legal for them to collect one. But right now, 22%, 30%, 70% that's being talked about is just highway robbery, and that is a government run amok. But what should the expenditures of the federal government actually be? Now, it's largely dominated by social programs right now. Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, things like that. Of course, defense is very, very large as well. But I'm going to throw up this chart right here, thanks to our friends over at Wikipedia, and I'm going to highlight this area right here, which is that 1.3% of the GDP, $271 billion, comes from excise taxes, estate and gift customs duties, and some others. But let's do some rounding errors here. I mean, we're talking about billions of dollars relative to trillions, so let's do some rounding and just work with it, okay? The federal government should be surviving off of $270 billion. Less than 1/10, about 8%, 7% maybe, of what they're actually spending right now. That is what's fair and what's constitutional relative to how the Constitution of the Founding Fathers actually intended it. Now, do I think that's reasonable? No, I don't think so. I think there's some other things in there, but that's what we should be aiming for. Instead of talking about a 1% reduction or a 1% increase or adjusting the marginal tax rate, they're all lying to us. They are all looking at this from a perspective that does not honor the founding ideals of this country, and that is the number we should actually be aiming for and talking about, but nobody's ever going to. Let me know your thoughts below. Thumbs up, thumbs down, subscribe, but let me know your thoughts, because I think this is honoring the Constitution.